Hello, my friend. The other day I got another email from Make Music, and this one was to invite me to a live stream about changing from Finale to Dorico, and I wanted to share my general thoughts about it with you based on what I saw, plus 5 takeaways that had me super pumped. Then I'll point you to a resource. It was almost by accident that I decided I'd head over to this webinar. I won't keep you too long today, but I really think this will be of help to you, especially if you've been watching my recent videos about this. So I was going through my email inbox yesterday, and I happened to see an email I had gotten a couple days prior, and I noticed the Dorico webinar was starting in a few minutes. So I decided to play hooky for a bit and check it out. After all, I've been doing these videos about this seismic shift in the notation software world, and so maybe this is research, right? Anyway, when I logged on, the first thing I noticed was that the live chat was just humming along. A good bit of it was Finale users that were understandably disgruntled, but the energy in that chat was definitely on the electric side. Secondly, I noticed that a lot of the team from the Dorico developers were there. The name I most recognized was former Sibelius employee Daniel Spreadberry, who, as I mentioned in a previous video, was so helpful to me in getting me going when I switched to Sibelius from Finale for my personal projects. This team was summarily fired by Avid when Avid bought Sibelius in 2023. Oh well, Avid hired some part-time people to basically keep the lights on. That felt like a dark day, and I quite honestly have never known any of these Avid people as individuals. They became quickly hidden behind a corporate shroud of sorts. I think that people are so important, and dedicated people in companies who care about you even more so. And it's a mistake for Avid to use their people like they're using them. On a side note, I was very happy that the team was basically hired en masse by Steinberg to develop Dorico. It's a good company. Steinberg, if you don't know, makes 2 very capable DAWs, or digital audio workstations, Cubase and Nuendo. The VST plugin format was developed by Steinberg in 1996. You most probably use the term VST like you say Kleenex to mean facial tissue. The truth is that plugins come in a wide variety of formats: MOS, AU, RTAS, and many more. As an aside, at the same time, I was pretty skeptical about the potential of the success of this venture, because the basically small world of the big 2, Finale and Sibelius, had the market cornered, it seemed to me. Plus, I still don't understand the etymology of the word Dorico. Does anyone else get that? Comment down below if you know something I don't. Comments do help the channel, of course, or just a like is great. But I think there's a massive importance to a name, and so that was a big liability in my view at the time. Anyway, the Dorico team was there at the webinar, and as the presenter, John Barron, launched into the content, I could see that people in the chat were being won over pretty quickly. A few others were asking for John to slow down. So, of course, I have to make my quick point about that, which I'm repeating and I apologize for. When you're learning something about something that you don't know, remember, try looking at it from a higher altitude. You can just be excited about the possibilities instead of being freaked out about the new information. I didn't look at Jimi Hendrix playing guitar at age 8 and think to myself, the learning curve is too steep here. I thought, I want to be able to play like that guy. You'll be fine. If you learned how to use Finale in a powerful way in the past, there's no doubt that you'll be fine with this. And the reason why I'm making this video is to make the point that I'm blown away by the intuitiveness of Dorico. At the end of the webinar, most people in the chat were discussing how intuitive it is in comparison to Finale. Now, since I was using Finale at version 1.0, I can tell you that Make Music really made Finale into a far more intuitive tool by the end of its development. But this blows that away. I always liked the quote from Henry Ford that people thought they wanted a better wagon wheel, but what they didn't realize they needed was a car. Of course, old Henry has turned out to be a bit problematic, so I'll just leave it there. Here are the main takeaways for me. Number 1, I like the way it's built into sections of a workflow paradigm. If you're familiar, the Sibelius ribbon is somewhat similar in a way, but that is basically about separating tasks. And this is more like the workflow paradigm of DaVinci Resolve. I love this software, and I'm going to edit this video in it, and I love Blackmagic's approach to this. If you're not familiar, the Resolve workflow is having separate pages or areas for a process, which is a sort of traffic flow for doing project beginning to end. So the pages, the media page, cut page, edit page, color correction, motion graphics, sound, and delivery allow you to work from section to section of the work process in a way that keeps you focused. That's in my opinion and experience. In the case of Dorico, I liked, for example, the way you don't adjust the intricacies of ties or slurs in the writing panel. In fact, you can't. But you can have complete control of those parameters in the engraving panel. That's a simple example, but this is a great design. Number 2, it does away, at least to a certain extent, what I call the tyranny of the grid approach that Finale, or Sibelius for that matter, presents. Not talking about the grid of the notation itself, which is another kind of tyranny we could talk about another time, but the grid of the basic process. Think of a parking lot where you can't create a space for your car just anywhere, but you have to park between the lines. That's great for parking cars, but not so great for generating ideas. In fact, I've always done all composing away from engraving apps, either on paper to start or in a DAW, in my case Digital Performer, because of the fact that in the major engraving programs, you had to start with a series of parameters. For example, you're basically forced into deciding the meter of a piece before you can write a note, or how you're forced into thinking linearly because of the hassle of pasting into the middle of something in these programs. It's a little hard to explain here, especially given I just saw this and haven't worked with it a lot, but they have certain ways that changing the duration of a note either actually corrects the rest of the durations toward the end of the bar or displaces the remainder of the music by moving it as is, later or earlier in time based on the change, based on a key command or preference. I've forgotten which this is, but it's really nifty and really well thought out. Number 3, as far as I can tell, it was designed with a new, I would say, unjaundiced approach to approaching notating something. For example, note entry, which is approached a lot differently, way more intuitive. Number 4, there's far more ability to manipulate the MIDI notes that underlie the notation. If mock-ups are important to you and you want to skip using a DAW, this means the ability to change durations and event attacks. You can either cause the notated music to be affected or not affected by those changes, depending on your choice in a given passage. I'm sure you've noticed in the past that you've played something into a program as MIDI, like Beethoven. And when you actually looked at what you played, it actually looks different than the notation you played it from. The notation in the DAW is actually a lot more correct in a way, but it's also superfluous. And it would be way too much information, so you'd never notate it like that. Simplest example, on a piano, you press the sustain pedal and then you play a short chord. If you look at the notation that the DAW automatically generates, it looks like a 16th note. But on the page, it's a bunch of whole notes because the action of the pedal makes that illusion possible that you're still holding it down. But what you really played was a short chord, so you could, for example, move your hand somewhere else to play the next thing. Do this for a while and you'll see a million more subtler examples of this, and you'll become convinced of the need to have the notation be different than the actual played passage, which is what this feature in Dorico addresses. Personally, I've always dealt with this in a sequencer by making another take of a track meant for notation, massaging it in the sequencer until the notation looks right, and then using the notation take for the export as an XML file to get the notation as close as possible before the export. Why? Because it's always been harder to fix in the engraving app after the fact. Will this change my working methodology? Not likely, because I generally use parts of the mock-up for the final and add other elements on top. So I need really convincing sound quality and the ability to be able to control my mix, use my best plugins and automation. But for those of you who make mock-ups that are not intended to be the final but are still impressive, this may really simplify your life. Now, I didn't see continuous controller data mentioned at the event, but I can tell you that in Sibelius and Finale, all this data is buried deep, deep, deep enough in there where it's practically impossible to manipulate. The human feel function in Finale is an attempt to do this, but to say it's heavy-handed and sometimes inappropriately applied is being charitable. Number 5, far more ability to manipulate the virtual instruments and easy management of all your sounds. You can use your Spitfire libraries, Vienna sounds, or the ARIA player or Note Performer if you've been using those with Finale and are happy with them. This is way more seamless. I can remember trying to program articulation changes into Finale for a client's custom string library a while back and having to drop the project because it became abundantly clear that his budget was not going to cover what it would take to pull this off. Now, it just seems to me more or less built in. This is big. I'll leave the link to this webinar, which is archived and you can watch in the description below. Let it wash over you the first time. Take in the possibilities. And remember, YouTube has speed controls and a transport, so you can repeat sections if you miss them, or slow it down. We stopped carving stuff in stone about 2,000 years ago. Well, there have been some holdouts. Now, the next webinar is Monday, by the way, on September 23rd. It's at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so 1 p.m. in LA, and I think 9 p.m. in London. If you want to go live, I want you to confirm that date and time so you don't miss it. They will basically repeat the same stuff as in the link I'm sharing, but you can also ask questions at the end if you're there for the live thing. Take a few breaths first, and then get going and have fun out there. See you next time.